Preamble: Native American Spirituality in Hiding. During most of Mad Bear's life, the practice of Native American spirituality was kept in hiding. The basic freedom of religion was denied. The sacred hoop was torn apart. Jim Pathfinder Ewing, Cherokee, gave a very important and detailed explanation of the causes behind this attack on Native American spirituality and attacks on being an Indian, in an article he wrote and posted on the Mantaka American Indian Council website. This site, unfortunately, is no longer online. Freedom of expression is undeniably guaranteed both as a First Amendment issue and under specific federal statutes, regulations, and executive orders. Many Americans don't realize this was not always the case. Until 1978, American Indians on reservations had no religious rights and were specifically barred from practicing traditional ceremonies. These efforts were driven by fear of uprisings by native populations, most notably epitomized by the massacre at Wounded Knee, December 29, 1890, when Lakota men, women, and children were gunned down while gathering for a ghost dance, a spiritual practice. Historically, the federal government sought to eradicate all forms of traditional spiritual practice and belief on reservations through the use of boarding schools, separating children from parents, prohibiting use of native languages, and making gatherings for ceremonial purposes illegal. The expressed intent was to civilize native peoples. A policy began under treaties well before the Trail of Tears, where forced removal marches in the 1830s with Cherokee and other eastern tribes. The result was a sustained federal policy of social and cultural annihilation. The justification for this denial of religious freedom, inexplicably enough, was that native peoples were sovereign nations by treaty and not granted the freedoms that American citizens claimed as fundamental rights. Under sovereignty, the U.S. government occupied the reservations, kept control of the populations through military might, imposed arbitrary civil orders, and prevented them from exercising freedoms guaranteed Americans under the U.S. Constitution, including the First Amendment freedom of religion that is bedrock to the Bill of Rights. This changed in 1978 with the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. International law. After the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was put in place, as well as the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, the statutes, orders, and rules issued by Congress, presidents, and federal rule-making bodies give specific directions and remedies so Native Americans have recourse to government to ensure religious freedoms. Religious freedom is also well grounded in international law, with the United States a signatory to more than a dozen conventions. Blood quantum. Most federal policies directing efforts to ensure religious rights are confined to lists of federally recognized tribes, which specify blood quantum for federal recognition. This poses several dilemmas. First, if a tribe's authorization is removed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, for whatever reason, members of that tribe are no longer covered by federal rules and regulations protecting their religious rights. Second, even if members of a tribe are historically and demonstrably members of a tribe, the tribe itself determines membership according to federally prescribed guidelines on blood quantum. Third, if an individual is denied tribal enrollment for blood quantum reasons, that person is no longer recognized as Native American under federal law and, hence, no longer falls within the scope of federal authority and protection of religious rights, as specifically defined for Native Americans. Federally imposed BIA tribes. Adding to the confusion is what constitutes a tribe legally. Most tribes today are lumping together of bands, in some cases, even separate groups that once went to war against each other. Tribal governments reflect federal requirements, not traditional practices either in selection of leaders or in their tribal administration. In effect, they are BIA tribes, that is, groups of individuals who hold a federal franchise on a legally recognized status designated as a tribe for legal purposes, defined by a treaty and overseen and held to rules of accountability outlined by the BIA. Rights in limbo. The federal government's reliance on blood quantum for tribal status actually continues the policy of cultural annihilation by disenfranchising offspring of Native Americans from recognition, status, and benefits in ever-increasing numbers. According to the U.S. government, if you don't have a BIA card, you cannot freely worship God according to your Native American faith. The only exception in this case is members, native or non-native, of the Native American Church, NAC. They have won federal protection. How do things get this way? To understand the crazy system of BIA, tribes in America, the restriction of Native American religious expression as protection, and the ongoing cultural annihilation today, one must go back to the initial links in the chain: blood quantum and sovereignty. Blood quantum is a holdover from pre-Civil War days when U.S. citizenship and rights were based on race. A white male had all rights as guaranteed by the Constitution. White females had some rights, couldn't vote, could not hold property, depending on the state. Blood quantum defined freedom. Legally, anyone with one drop of Negro blood was considered non-white, defined in the landmark case of Gray v. Ohio in 1831, and they were considered chattel or property unless legally freed. Indians, unless specified by treaty, legally didn't exist. The United States considered American Indians as nations, and their members as those under the nations, sovereignty, which meant they had no U.S. citizenship rights. In law, Indians weren't even considered human beings. If a white man claimed a tract of land and Indians were living on it, they were legally equated as being deer, rabbits, and squirrels, not human, and protected only by their nation's sovereignty. That meant that the only rights they had were the ones granted by treaty and enforced by the U.S. government, and only while residing on treaty lands. Not only did Indians have no civil rights in America, they had no human rights. This was the law of the land across the United States, essentially a policy of genocide that resulted in the near extermination of native peoples. The American Civil War did free the slaves, but American Indians received no benefit at all. For Indians, the Civil War didn't end the travesty of freedom defined by blood or skin color. In fact, it was well after the Civil War when blood quantum became the legal requirement for Native American tribal membership. After the Indian Territory became the state of Oklahoma, November 16, 1907, the U.S. government, through the Department of Interior, began issuing Certificate of Indian Blood, CDIB cards, as a prerequisite for participation in the federal government assistance program for Indians. These CDIB cards were based on the blood quanta listed on the Dawes Roll, a 1906 Indian census that today is considered by Oklahoma Indians, backed by the BIA, to be the only acceptable way to document Native American heritage. Unless someone was registered as an Indian in 1906, that person was not an Indian, and his or her descendants aren't legally considered Indian today, regardless of family, lineage, or belief. The standard, arbitrary even in its time, was largely based on skin color. The main issue for Native Americans today, though, is not civil rights, but human rights, of which freedom of religion is at the heart. Protections are limits on freedoms. The BIA system is a conundrum for the tribes themselves. The only way the tribes can obtain rights promised to them is to play the game, as designated by federal laws and rules. Yet, following federal laws and rules leads to loss of autonomy and cohesiveness. Ironically, the social entities, tribes, which are designated to have rights protected by law are penalized by those protections. These protective laws are of the same insidious ilk as sovereignty, which was once used to rob Indians of their land, even kill them, and deny them religious freedom when forced to live on tribal lands a century and a half ago. History substantiates that sovereignty never meant much to the federal government or any federal office since the concept was broached. In 1851, Congress passed the Indians Appropriations Act, Appropriation Bill for Indian Affairs, which sought to concentrate Native American populations on reservations. By then, all who could flee federal control had done so or were doing so, as Native individuals and groups had done for generations. It should be noted that it was also in 1851 that the last vestiges of the traditional Native way of legitimizing self-government was lost as well. Before the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie with the Western tribes, the federal government had sought to find someone it could designate a chief to sign a treaty and thereby steal rights and lands under treaty. This treaty depended on acknowledging agreement from the sovereign subjects of that chief. Later, in 1871, all previous treaties with the sovereign Indian nations were abrogated by Congress via another Indians Appropriations Act. Moreover, Congress directed that all Indians should be treated as individuals and legally designated wards of the federal government. Native governance. Native peoples had always adhered to the form of self-government, whereupon all made decisions together after days of council. With the Cherokee and Iroquois, it's called the clan system. In the Lakota and allied Western tribes, it's called circle meetings of the people. That made it difficult for the federal government to play its sovereignty charade. Under circle meetings of the people, Native America actually practiced genuine sovereignty through democracy. But with the Cherokee removal treaties and the 1851 Laramie Treaty, any pretense of democracy was cast aside. The federal government designated its own chiefs and determined who they governed, empowering them to sign away rights of the people without their consent. Because of the government's interference in tribal governance, even some natives contended that no treaty or agreements with the U.S. federal government since 1851 are valid. And, of course, many of the treaties the government forced prior to then are invalid too, since those who signed them were not entitled to speak for even what the federal government considered the Indian nations. It should be considered too that instituting chiefs with the unilateral ability to speak for the people was totally foreign to native thought. Tribes themselves are Western concepts. Most native people were grouped according to bands or family groupings, if nomadic, and towns, if settled. This caused great difficulty for the federal government, and so it offered sovereignty for nations that previously had been loose confederations or alliances, and even ones that had long-standing hostilities with each other. That sovereignty was supposed to protect the various nations and individuals among the tribes. Pet rock of the federal government. Native America today, under the BIA system, could be seen as the pet rock of the U.S. federal government. A dependent novelty, tolerated, patronized, and given false hope while kept captive in a bureaucratic nightmare, and diminished under a system that since its beginnings has had assimilation and ultimate annihilation as its goal. Sovereignty and self-determination are the empty buzzwords that would perpetrate the system of bureaucratic enslavement. Defining religious rights is a powerful wedge for keeping Indians in line. It also puts pressure on tribes regarding traditions and culture. Spiritual practices on the reservations can be controlled. In the general population, they cannot. Tribal leaders are of two minds. One line of reasoning goes that whites, mixed bloods, and non-Indians can steal their traditions, culture, and way of life. Therefore, sacred knowledge should be closely guarded, protected even through federal law, and dissemination discouraged outside of the reservation. The other line of reasoning goes that spiritual power belongs to Creator. Native Americans were given this knowledge for a reason, with a covenant to preserve, honor, and protect the earthly mother. Therefore, to withhold sacred knowledge spells doom for Earth and all its inhabitants. The federal government exploits this rift through extending specific protections for Native American spirituality only for federally recognized tribes and individuals designated by those tribes who carry blood quantum BIA cards, the same CDIB cards of a century ago, designating them as Native American. Yet millions of Americans have some Native ancestry, and others who practice Native American spirituality don't or can't prove it if they did, including individuals who live on reservations and have been historically recognized as members of a tribe. In violation of international conventions that the United States has formally agreed to, millions of these Americans are being discriminated against in the practice of their religion. Despite claims of adhering to civil and human rights commitments, the U.S. government has been unremitting in fragmenting and destroying Native America, including its spiritual beliefs. From the 19th century until the time that the Freedom of Religion Act was passed in 1978, spiritual leaders ran the risk of jail sentences of up to 30 years for simply practicing their rituals. Much of Native American spirituality was lost, as religious practices went underground, were forgotten, or abandoned. In the meantime, forcing children into Christian boarding schools and intense missionary work during this time produced the result that most Native Americans today either follow a mainstream Christian denomination or mix it with traditional beliefs. The syncretism of Native American church is a good example of this. Not all spiritual practice fared as well. Many traditional beliefs have been fragmented or misconstrued. You don't look Indian. Despite blood quantum requirements for BIA tribe membership, racial characteristics alone do not define what an Indian is. The Dawes roll itself is problematic. It was created 70 years after removal. Generations of Cherokees had already fled, intermarried, or been accepted by the tribe with as little as 1/32nd Indian blood, making the blood quantum standard meaningless. The result is that there are probably as many more Cherokee descendants with as much more Indian blood without CDIB cards as with them. Nor are the Cherokees alone in this. More than 60 years ago, Dr. Alice Hrdlicka, physical anthropologist of the Smithsonian Institute, commented, "There is probably not a full-blood Indian in this continent today." Per the BIA, regardless of culture, tradition, or heritage, or even birth upon a reservation, if someone is 1/8 Indian, then that person is considered white. They are no longer Indian, and their children and their children's children will be white forever. The protection of their right to practice their spirituality that comes with federal recognition will be automatically denied to them. There's Indians and there's real Indians. One of the greatest tragedies of the BIA, the tribe system, and the intertwining links of sovereignty, blood quantum, and designation of what is an Indian according to federal law is the cultural elitism it engenders. If a person, regardless of blood, heritage, spiritual belief, or practice, does not belong to a BIA tribe, or is of mixed ancestry, or cannot prove ancestry, that person is not an Indian. His or her religious beliefs are not recognized or honored by the federal government's law and often by the BIA, tribes, and outsiders either. That person is not a real Indian. Reservations declining. Some seem surprised that so many Americans declare themselves Indian. That should be no surprise. After generations of being disenfranchised, run off or otherwise discouraged from claiming native ancestry, starting in the 1600s, the surprise should be that there are not more. In fact, the number of Americans who have some native heritage could be as much as 10 times the number listed on BIA rolls. That so many cannot document their lineage is largely due to the fact that declaring oneself native opened one up to suspicion, discrimination, and outright abuse. Better to blend in. Nor is there much incentive to seek tribal affiliation if it means life on poverty-stricken reservations. Successive wave of Indians are leaving reservations, which adds to upward mobility, but can also result in loss of cultural identity. This presents a challenge to reservations: how to solve social ills, increased education and employment, but keep young people both at home and following traditional ways. Cultural attrition is compounded by the fact that many who live on reservations do not adhere to traditional beliefs. Central to this is that generations of American Indians have been either diverted from claiming ancestry, driven off, socialized to reject their heritage while claiming to be white or another ethnic group, or have been coerced or enticed to lose their connections or membership with tribes or traditional native ways. It must be remembered that one must apply to be a member of a tribe. The more one is removed from the reservation and tribal life, the less likely that connection will be kept, maintained, or passed on. This has been going on for 300 years, leading to a diaspora of native peoples. Pan-Indians rising. In an attempt to assimilate Indians into mainstream culture, the BIA began establishing Indian centers in urban areas. By the early 1970s, about 10,000 Indians were leaving their reservations each year to live in cities. In all, over 100,000 Indians migrated into these urban centers. This assimilation led to the growth of pan-Indian communities, where tribal culture and native ways were introduced into mainstream culture, broadening interest in traditional ways and causing Native American spirituality to be more broadly adopted by mixed bloods, non-traditional Indians, and other cultures and whites. This pan-Indian influence has led to rites such as Sundance, at one time an exclusively Plains tribal practice, to be adopted as Indian in general. At the same time, this pan-Indian influence has sparked a backlash, such as Lakota leader Averell Lookinghorse, seeking to incorporate his tribe's traditions as protected by U.S. federal law under his Protection of Ceremonies proclamation. To give further power to the federal government to regulate Native American spirituality only hastens cultural annihilation, ensuring that it dies with the fewer and fewer BIA card Indians who continue to practice traditional ways. Any Indian tribes should feel free to practice their own ways of Native American spirituality, any way they deem fit, and take whatever reasonable action they wish among their own members. Clearly, no Indian tribe has the right to presume what is right and wrong spiritual practice for other tribes, groups, or individuals, much less try to franchise their belief under force of federal law and impose them upon other people. Wannabes. The Pan-Indian movement has also led to members of some tribes to condemn other members of other tribes for not practicing what they deem to be legitimate teachings when, in fact, there has always been wide diversity in beliefs among tribes. It has led to members of one tribe, belief, faction, or another to disparage others as illegitimate, or wannabes, or false Indians, or pink Indians, or frauds for not having blood quantum BIA certification or following pan-Indian beliefs and practices that are wholly legitimate within their tribes, lineage, or belief systems. Defaming and exposing people of other tribes, faiths, beliefs, and traditions through such words as wannabe, etc., should be clear signal to anyone that the attackers are attempting to coerce, intimidate, silence, and ostracize other groups, ways, and leaders. People, by rights, are free to hold their own wisdom traditions without being subjected to public ridicule, harassment, and character assassination. Such disreputable behavior speaks volumes about those who make such accusations, especially when those making them hide themselves in anonymity or cloak themselves with high-sounding organizations that are composed only of a few like believers. Stereotypes. Pan-Indian belief is both a blessing and a curse. It has popularized and disseminated Native American spirituality, but it also has a downside in that it has hardened stereotypes. The Lakota belief system, for example, is powerful, a wonderfully coherent way of seeing the world spiritually, which has been popularized and romanticized by television and movies since talkies began. But not all Native people wore war bonnets, lived off of buffalo, or in teepees. Native American spirituality unbound. The problem is not Pan-Indianism. Pan-Indianism has happened and continues to grow. The genie is out of the bottle and can never be put back. Resistance to Pan-Indianism is ethnocentric and intolerant at its root. To assert that there is one right way of practicing Native American spirituality echoes the Christian missionary battle cry. What it engenders is a divisive, destructive waste of energy and resources. Indians warring against themselves and against those who they see as outsiders trying to usurp their religious authority. Recognizing only one tradition as the only legitimate form of Pan-Indianism, like Lakota or Plains tradition, for example, destroys indigenous culture just as surely as insisting on blood quantum as a requirement for religious belief. Although it is clear that the BIA tribe system created and sustains Pan-Indianism, pitting Indian against Indian, ironically, it might possibly be Native America's salvation. The Gandawida, also known as the Peacemaker, a Huron, came upon the scene possibly about 1000 AD. Prior to his arrival, the tribes that came to be known as the Iroquois Confederation were warring against each other. They were savage, even cannibalistic. The Peacemaker taught how disparate factions can join as one, to believe as one, while maintaining separate identities. The Gandawida's way is called the good mind, peace in practice. When individuals recognize that spirit is greater than all, then differences are minor. Such proactive unity is called for today. Keeping Native America divided leads to its cultural destruction. Native America survived on this continent for millennia through a balance of peace and war, seeing conflict as a practical matter, not an end to itself. The whole system of peace chiefs and war chiefs understood the need for balance to survive. The history of Native America is one of adaptation to change, small wars and large peace, of peoples rising, falling, and joining together in synergy. The choice. Academicians, the media, the BIA supporters, and the wannabe sleuths don't understand the phenomenon of people living close to the land, honoring native traditions, and rejecting the worst of the BIA tribe system in favor of traditional ways of governance. They buy in to the idea that non-BIA Indians aren't real Indians. It is up to us, the non-BIA Indians, in harmony with traditionalists living on the reservations, to make it right, to keep the flame alive, to honor the traditions, to weave the traditions back again into the fabric of life so our ancestors will live again in honor. We must mend the broken tribes, make peace among ourselves, find the lost and welcome them back home. We do honor to ourselves this way. We must heal the circle that was broken and open it to all who would embrace it, so that it will grow wider and stronger than ever before. The great reservoir of knowledge. Among unrecognized tribes and those who have lost their connections with the tribes is a great reservoir of knowledge of Native American spirituality. Many among them don't think they know anything and are hungry for information of the traditions and knowledge. They falsely tend to discount their own knowledge because they are removed from the imprimatur of the reservation system. Often they know a lot. They know so much that they don't know that they know, such as stories handed down, ways of unconsciously doing things that are comfortable for them. They think they are simply common ways of doing things or just the way things are. The unrecognized tribes are untapped sources of tradition that were destroyed and forgotten under the BIA system, repositories of ways of worship, social structure, and belief. They are often hungry to receive more and practice more, joining with and returning home to the ways of their past ancestors. On the reservations, many practice the forms of traditional religion, such as attending festivals, dances, etc., but without beliefs, particularly since the vast majority of people on reservations today claim mainstream religion as their spiritual affiliation. The traditional spiritual or ceremonial elders are nearly extinct on the reservations today, and certainly they are diminished in social and cultural importance, often replaced by powwow officials who have adopted the outward forms without the spiritual underpinnings. Powwows certainly don't practice or promote Native American spirituality. In order to be meaningful, Native American spirituality must breathe, must grow, and it must live, as it has been doing quietly amidst the assaults of government coercion. Growth means change. Native American spirituality is either growing or changing, or it's dying. It cannot simply stay static or moribund, declining as it is under the BIA system, or bound by Hollywood stereotypes, or it will simply fade away to become a relic of the past. In order to thrive, Native American spirituality should be encouraged to blossom wherever it can be found, in all its diversity, like little plants struggling to survive in a harsh climate. In this way, the fields will grow naturally again, not forced into row crop pockets on ever more unproductive land. Some Native American spiritual elders and holy people are welcoming this broadening of the circle, to encompass all who profess sincere faith in Native American spirituality. They point to Native Americans' traditional orientation of inclusion, of making of relatives, or adoption. We are all members of the five-fingered tribe. The medicine wheel encompasses all the colors of the rainbow, with all the four directions, black, white, yellow, and red, the colors of the four races, all encompassed by Mother Earth. In this, regardless of birth, blood, or history, we are all relations. It is through new blood and new life that native peoples will rise again, and be stronger than before the Europeans came. This is not a taking, but a giving, as traditional belief and practice has always been. The making of a relative, to make bonds stronger and increase the circle of relations. Certainly, there are people who practice ways that are unusual or unorthodox under the label of Native American spirituality. But all of open hearts, open minds, and willingness to learn should not be turned away or condemned for ignorance. Those who seek to build divisions, those who throw away words like fake or wannabe, and seek to besmirch and destroy their own who share the teachings, those who label New Age anything they don't understand, are promoting the death of their own culture. The circle will only get smaller and smaller under the current BIA system, until the beliefs and practices die with us. Creator creates. Creator supports the emergence of new ways. Creator doesn't condemn and deny, limit and destroy, or seek to undermine and poison the flowering of spirit in all its many ways. Every human being has the God-given right to find and express purity of heart, to follow where the Spirit leads, to find meaning in the world from a spiritual perspective, and to follow the unique path suited for that person to find God. There is no official Native American religion, nor should there be. There never has been, and now is not the time to start. Being Indian. In traditional ways, being Indian was never so much a matter of blood, but a spiritual way of life, walking the red road. And it has always been so. The way of spirit is unity. The way of spirit is wholeness. The way of spirit is oneness. Aho.